The All Blacks absolutely pumped the Boks. Is that true? Look, the score was quite a lot, but I've got 20 takeaways for this for you, and I'm not sure the answer to all of this is that they got pumped. Yes, big win for the All Blacks, but actually there's a more nuanced story in here, and I want to talk about it. So we've got 20 takeaways here that I'm going to run you through on this, and then let's have a chat at where we get to. So I made my notes, and I think the first thing is that 33-16 doesn't tell the full story on this, right? Like, New Zealand won by 17 points, they scored 5 tries to 1. Yes, all of this. But this was an arm wrestle. This was still actually a battle, and I think we need to reflect that that's true, because it's easy to get lost in the superlatives of it all and get all overexcited. Look, South Africa led 13-12 at halftime. Then they went 16-12 ahead. Things could have been quite different. They had long periods where they controlled territory and set piece, and yes, they didn't score enough, and we will come to that. So the big question that we kind of get as point number one of these 20 is, it's not simply how did New Zealand win, it's how did a game this close in many ways become 33-16, right? Number 2 on our points, and this is a big one, and actually Rennie and Rassie have both touched on it in the post-match, and that's that actually the Boks are scoring 0.91 points every time they enter the All Blacks 22. And I think it was Dave Rennie, and I've got it on my notes here, he said that the Springboks normally average 5.5 points. 5.5 points per entry. So a really notable difference, right? And I think it was New Zealand had 3.67, we'll come to that in a second. But this explains the frustration for South Africa, because actually they got into the right areas repeatedly, right? They consistently got there, but possessions ended with errors, turnovers, missed opportunities instead of points. And typically they'd turn them into points, and so that hurts. It's big. Number 3 is the flip of that, which is that New Zealand were still converting points. So 3.67 points per 22 entry for them. And look, I know this is dry statistics, but it is actually quite relevant and quite helpful. You know, I think it was, about 4 times the return that South Africa are getting. At the 64-minute mark, there was a breakdown that someone shared, whereas, at that point, South Africa had 9 entries for 1.1 points and New Zealand 6 at 4.3. So look, this is basically what clinical looks like. And the All Blacks were clinical, and the Springboks were not. So New Zealand didn't need to dominate the field the way they might have. They just needed to keep punishing South Africa whenever the door got opened a little bit. And this is the interesting thing, right? This is what comes through. Number 4 on our list of 20. South Africa, your scrum was an absolute demolition job, certainly for the first 54 minutes. Springboks scrum was probably the clearest area of dominance throughout the entire match, and certainly at half-time it was looking like it was going to be a really big problem for New Zealand. It didn't look like they'd got a grip of what was going on. I think it's a really big problem. So Nché, Wilco, Louw, they created huge problems for that starting front row. The reality was that Ethan de Groot and Tara Lomax were struggling, and there was penalties coming through, repeatedly sending New Zealand backwards. It was, look, I'm in New Zealand, it was horrible to see, right? And so that makes this result a little bit more interesting, if I'm honest, because South Africa had one of their traditional weapons, the one that we all rely on, functioning really, really well. But they still couldn't turn it into points. And that's a really interesting conversation to have. There will be some of you right now going, well, where was the penalties? Actually, that's going to lead into scrum, into point number 5, because I think they were just about to get yellow cards. I think New Zealand were on the edge of losing a player because it had kind of been strung out and it was enough, and the ball was getting away. It was also often the New Zealand put in that the penalties were happening on, so the kind of like penalty, if not penalty, but like they'd already lost the ball that they had to put in, so it slightly changes things, right? And the cynical nature of somebody's put in and all of that. So but I do think they were just about it. And then 56 minutes in, South Africa was still only 3 points behind at that point. They had put in 5 metres from the Wicks line, nice and central. They'd been repeatedly on top. And then the replacement front row that was on, George Bower, Asafa Amua, Fletcher Newell, they won that penalty against the feed. A huge And I think even Roygaard in like interviews afterwards was joking around about the big ode of beer. That seems fair. So instead of another Springbok penalty, and honestly probably a yellow card, New Zealand escaped. And within kind of like minutes of that, the momentum truly had swung. Number 6. And by the way, this is a series that I'm kind of trying to do. It gives us a nice format to be able to speak to different parts of the games, different responses. Hope you enjoy it. Please do let me know if you are, and please follow along if you are, because actually, you know, I quite enjoyed doing them, and it makes a difference. Oh, by the way, this right here, I need to get this is the Rayburn Shield. I'll talk more about that shortly. South Africa, Malcolm Marx's chance. So before half time, South Africa, they had turned another scrum penalty into an attacking line out, and they got their maul moving nicely. And Malcolm Marx looked like he was about to score, but he lost the ball. And it was just one of those moments where the platform looked like it was there, and they needed to score, but they just didn't. And I'll be honest, because this was just before half time, my reaction was, oh God, it's going to be another scrum. Even though it was New Zealand's put in, because at that point it was under such pressure. But it was interesting because given the amount of pressure that South Africa had generated up to that point, that was a huge miss, right? Like if they had gone in at halftime having scored that, it makes a big difference. Number 7, Fabian Holland. Fabian Holland. He flipped this game. Like what was it? Colby's penalty. And by the way, Colby kicking, that's fun. We knew he had it in his locker, but I didn't know he was going to be kicking today. I haven't even touched on that in my notes particularly. But almost immediately, Fabian Holland charged down that Grant Williams kick, gathered the loose ball and scored. And suddenly New Zealand were 1916 and the scoreboard pressure takes over. And it's just another great example of that kind of efficiency story where actually the Springboks make a mistake in their own half and it instantly points to the All Blacks. And the Springboks weren't able to do that in return, right? I think all of this is really interesting because I don't think the Springboks will struggle as bad in Cape Town. We're going to do another video where we talk about next week and we'll digest everything that happened today a little bit more and look at who's injured, everything else. We'll come to that. But I do think the takeaway from all of this is we're in for a battle next week. Number 8. South Africa lost both wings, and that broke their backline shape, which is really interesting, right? You had Curtly Aarons, he failed an early head injury concussion or head injury assessment, and interestingly, I think it was from a mouthguard. So there was like a mouthguard warning, took him off, and he did fail. So there you go. And then Cheslin Kolbe limped off after 58 minutes. By the way, that man could step somebody in a phone box. His footwork is glorious. He never fails to surprise me, Cheslin. Same with the way he gets up in the air. You're like, he's a little fella. How does he do it? But he's obviously got springs in his legs. Like, it's remarkable and good experience. By the end, we had Grant Williams covering the wing. Dalian Valenza had also shifted position. And basically, when we look at the end of the game, we look at how disjointed South Africa were at times. And they did start to get quite disjointed. I mean, the yellow cards, will come to those. But that matters, right? That was 6-2 not really paying off. And look, that's and I say 6-2, obviously you got Easterhuizen, but as you could see at the end, right, that's not the same as having a full-time backline player. However amazing he is, by the way, and he is. Number 9, Jordie Barrett. Jordie Barrett was everywhere. So the stats that I've got here says that he had 15 tackles and 5 turnovers won. Like, that's a huge defensive kind of contribution from an inside centre, right? That's pretty impressive. He was also the secondary playmaker for New Zealand, and so his influence wasn't just on that defensive side, he was also very, very strong on the attack. So he helped connect that attack whilst constantly killing the Springbok momentum. Huge game from him. And so in a match where we're looking at kind of, I think, a definition of the Springboks failing to convert pressure, Barrett was a big part of the reason why some of those promising pressure points kept ending without points. He did really well. It was really impressive. So just a note, this Rayburn Shield is essentially a kind of like winner stays on title. So I can take you back to the first ever international in 1871 when Scotland beat England at Rayburn Place. And then you just play winner stays on, so the man who beat the man. And there's 715 games since then that it's been passed through. And New Zealand recently won it off Ireland, and today it was on the line. So if South Africa had won, they would have taken it. New Zealand won, so they defended it. That means that next week in Cape Town it'll be on the line again. So South Africa absolutely could take it. Look, I'll come back to it, but that title, and I'll come back to why it's sitting in my man cave with me. Come there. Number 10, Jasper Wiese. Whoo! That boy is solid, right? He just kept winning collisions. Like, he was just a really big source of, like, front football. He kept on asking questions of the All Blacks defence. He was genuinely a really physical threat, even whilst the rest of the attack was, like, struggling. And so, really important, came through. And so, it's important to kind of take note of that, right? Like, South Africa weren't losing every collision. They weren't being physically bullied by New Zealand. Their problem was what happened after they generated the momentum. They weren't able to take advantage once they got there. So, it's interesting. Number 11, we're going to 20. So I hope you're still enjoying them. New Zealand found space around the box. Look, New Zealand didn't continually try and run through South Africa's biggest bodies. Actually, did you notice how often Tupovae was out in the wide channels? He sat there on the wing half the time. His carry and offload was central to Josh Morby's first half try. Like, and it's showing how having a big forward operating away from those tight exchanges can actually distort the defensive line. So it's really interesting to see that. Now, that's clearly a tactical move because that variation mattered in the end, right? South Africa could dominate the scrum without necessarily choosing where New Zealand chose to attack, and actually the New Zealand attack was paying off. So there's a really kind of interesting piece there where you start to look at how they're going to use that, and then we start to look next week, and I already am starting to think about the different things that the different coaches are going to be looking at, and they're coaching teams, right? Like the amount of time that is going to be spent looking over these games by these coaching staff, it's going to be huge. Number 12. So South Africa, the backs didn't get enough return. Like, we just had to be open about that, right? Like, Damian Willemse, he was excellent under the high ball. Cheslin Colby remains dangerous. He can step anywhere. But neither of them are consistently getting, like, attacking ball in situations where they can really hurt New Zealand. So, like, too often you're getting a kind of, dare I say, promising possession that just becomes another carry, box kick, collision, rather than an actual opportunity to release South Africa's attacking talent. And they do have attacking talent. They've got good talent. So that's where this whole 0.91 points scored per 22 entry becomes tactical rather than statistical, right? Like, as in, it's not just, I talked about it earlier, it's like it's a dry number, but actually the box could reach the 22, but, they just couldn't turn that possession into high quality chances to score points. Now the answer is, should they have kicked more? Should they have gone for more penalties? Is there a difference in style to be able to come through? They'll resolve this. They will resolve this. Number 13, Cam Roigard. That boy, he did pretty good, I thought. He didn't get rattled. Early on, they clearly wanted to put pressure on him. It was so clear. They just really wanted to put the pressure on him. They were especially around that breakdown. They wanted his kicking game, and around the scrum, they wanted him to feel the pressure. They wanted to see if they could put that on him. But actually, he did really well. And you could see that early doors, right? You could see, I think it was Eben Etzebeth who got pinged early doors for going early. Absolutely always the plan. They always wanted to put him under that pressure, put him in two minds, make it come through. They went early on it. Sometimes you get away with that, sometimes you don't. This time they got pinged, and it was interesting. The pass that Cam Roigard put in for Will Jordan's opening try was great, right? He he settled. You could see him settling into controlling New Zealand's tempo, despite what was a pretty messy ball at times from a retreating scrum. That was problematic. But you could see from him, it was him at that 56th minute where that scrum happened. His reaction to that replacement front row tells you everything about New Zealand's mentality, and how he drives that team. It was his reaction. It's that kind of emotional, lift that you're looking for. And it was really interesting to see that kind of come through, and the influence that he has there. And actually, I've already touched on it here, but number 14 is about Etzebeth, and he set that aggressive tone right from the start, because that's what he was looking to do, right? He was looking to charge down Roygaard, and sort of already covered a little bit, but he was caught offside. But it showed what the Springbok intention was really clearly, and it put, they wanted to put pressure on New Zealand decision makers, and they wanted to make every single kick or pass uncomfortable. Downside of that, discipline, right? And South Africa were aggressive in those opening minutes, but too often that aggression eventually became kind of penalties, errors. Ultimately, when we get later into the game, yellow cards. New Zealand, well, bench. We don't call them a bomb squad. Look, the starting scrum was under huge pressure, but actually when Boa, Amua and Newell came on, they stabilised it. They made the difference that needed to be happened. So they didn't suddenly dominate South Africa all afternoon. Like, it wasn't, but they just found enough parity at the moment that New Zealand needed it to be able to reset and to be able to regain the momentum. And obviously I've already talked about that 5-metre defensive scrum that happened in the 56th minute a few times, because I do think it's pivotal to the whole game, to be honest. It's funny, there's moments in games where you see things switch. And sometimes you can see them after the game, and sometimes you can see them in the moment. I felt like it could have been that moment when watching it. I was like, oof. But you just don't know, right? At that point, certainly from a personal perspective, I'm way too paranoid. I was texting with a South African mate like 65 minutes in when things were looking pretty good for the All Blacks. And I was like, mate, no, I'm not having any, he was trying to be like, you guys have got it. And I was like, I'm not having any of this. it's all on the line. But winning that is why replacement impact isn't always measured by like carries, tackles. Like, sometimes the set piece can be the thing that changes the game for you. I say sometimes, all the time, right? I mean, I'm a former tight head prop, so I will always rate scrums. Actually, this is an interesting side conversation that might not be popular, and I hadn't necessarily planned to have a conversation about this, but hey, bugger it, let's go for it. I'm not a huge fan of cards for scrummaging penalties, and I'm a former tight head prop. Just because you're already getting a benefit when you dominate somebody in the scrum and you're getting penalties, and you've already turned one of the set pieces into a go-to place for you. And don't get me wrong, I love it when, my teams are getting the benefit of that, and many's the time that they have. But it's an interesting discussion, because actually you're already benefiting quite highly, because you know that piece of set piece, if you're getting particularly regular penalties, you can just march up the field, right? You can just keep at it. And that every time somebody knocks it on, all of a sudden you can play much more loosely. So there's so much benefit to your dominant scrum that I don't know. It's one of those ones where I'm like, sometimes it feels like a double whammy. Anyway, today it didn't matter, because it didn't happen. As I say, I think it was about to. I think if that defensive scrum hadn't happened, it would. Anyway, let me crack on, because I wrote myself a plan. We should probably stick to it. So number 16, South Africa, their discipline finally collapsed at around the 70-minute mark. Marco van Staden was yellow carded, followed almost immediately by Kobus Reinach. Look, the Marco van Staden one, actually I totally get it. I totally get how it came through. When you're defensive, and that level of defensive pressure on your line, pretty much, like, it's cynical. And I've seen a few people commenting, going, oh, is it fair when you're in that situation on your line and you commit a penalty like that? You just do get yellow carded. On the tackle, and actually I haven't necessarily put a lot of this into my notes, but let's have this chat now. So TMOs was really interesting, right? Because actually I thought it was quite good that the TMO got pushed back on a few times. I think it was right to do so. I think the TMO was being overly officious, and the high tackle is a great example of that. It wasn't a high tackle. It just wasn't. It was the guy whiplashed his head forward in the tackle. Now, don't get me wrong, it could have been, as in being that high does put you at risk. That could have easily, guy could have come in a little bit lower and you'd be in trouble, but that isn't what happened. What happened was you had a shoulder on, kind of shoulder chest area, and they whiplashed forward into it. That's not foul play. And anyone who's claiming for it or showing you stills of it, God, I hate stills sometimes because it's just, they need to take a look at themselves. That wasn't a yellow. And I'd feel exactly the same the other way around. Because, look, I am a Kiwi, right? So I have to own any internalized bias I might have. In this case, I don't think there's any internalized bias at play. On the referee, I've not made the referee a conversation point of this video. I've seen quite a lot of people doing so. I think quite a lot of people accepting it. I mean, Russie certainly was cool about it, like in terms of he just referenced that they need to be better. Peter Steph-Toy was the same. I've seen others who are complaining. Look, I genuinely think, refs get things wrong in every game. It's literally the hardest job on the pitch. Like, literally the hardest job on the pitch. But I thought the decisions were pretty good as it went. There was certainly things for both teams that I looked at today. I went, oof. But literally every game that happens because it's such a hard game to ref. In the round, I thought it was pretty fair. The challenge of the two TMOs I liked. The yellow cards we're talking about now. So, as I say, I think Marco van Staden, I just think that's what happens. And then same with Kopus Ronak, right? Like, you got to take your medicine, mate. You're like, bad decision. And it was that thing where it's just pressure. It's just pressure. Scoreboard pressure, time pressure. And so suddenly you had South Africa playing with 13 men. Of course, New Zealand found some space. And Jordan got a second try. That's how it works. So the cards did kind of inflate the margin, I reckon. But they were also kind of just part of the performance that was building. They were part of the pressure package that the All Blacks were putting on. So, South Africa's frustration and the pressure of everything turned into costly infringements on the line, which is where you get the cynical kind of yellow cards. Number 17, New Zealand's Will Jordan. That boy, he just keeps finishing, right? And it's funny, he scored the first and last tries today, so he did pretty well. The second came from a big long pass to Ardie Savea. South Africa was stretched because they were down to 13 men. It wasn't what I'd call like a flawless Will Jordan performance. And I'm not going to say that, some of his tries he gets the ball and he puts it down, but he has a knack of putting himself in that spot, right? Like, he just does do a great job of being where he needs to be to create opportunities and to punish teams. So fair play, Will. You are a solid player. You could see his back was pretty well strapped up as well a couple of times. So clearly, that back injury that's kept him out, they're still looking after it. And there was a couple of points where he looked sore. I was like, oh, are you okay? Anyway, 18. South Africa, hey, look, the 6-2 bench, or 5-3 if you want to call it, because they've got their kind of hybrid player. It's a great plan when everything goes to plan. But actually losing Arinze, I always feel like I'm saying that wrong, and Colby, that two-back insurance policy becomes pretty thin, right? So Williams ended up on the wing, and the midfield and the back three were kind of constantly rearranged. So that didn't help as we got late into the game, because actually all of a sudden the option. So it's not that it makes 6-2 a bad strategy. 6-2 isn't a bad strategy. It can work really well for you, but it's a demonstration of the risk that's inherent with that strategy, even with your hybrid players. So I think that's interesting. Number 19, we're nearly there. I'm nearly through it. And by the way, just this isn't official. The reason it's with me is because I have created this movement to create a linear world title. I just genuinely believe it improves world rugby. The idea is that winner stays on kind of title, moving around the world to any nation, just adds an extra thread of interest to games that are already happening. Now in this series, because New Zealand bring it in, we're actually going to see 4 challenges in a row with the same teams. But normally it's a different team each week, because whichever team holds it, they take it somewhere else. And you have teams looking ahead going, oh, when do we get a chance? And of course, before today, South Africa hadn't had a shot in it in 2 years, because they lost it in the summer of 2024 to Ireland. And then just haven't had another shot at it. And that's part of the thing, is it's not, the Rayburn Shield doesn't tell you who the best team in the world is. They tell you who took their shot when they got a chance. And of course, the best teams keep it for the longest. We'll see how long New Zealand keep it. It's going to be tough, because South Africa is still good. Don't let anything disabuse you of that fact. So New Zealand's biggest, this is number 19, New Zealand, their biggest win was pressure absorption. The ability to soak up the pressure They were behind on territory. They were under severe scrum pressure. They were repeatedly defending close to their own line, but they kept finding a turnover, a scramble tackle, an exit. And like the defensive group did really well, right? Like when South Africa had broken them, they got up and they managed to scramble back and they managed to make it work. So I actually think Dave Rennie will value that as much as anything else, because it speaks to the culture that they're building and to the team that they're building. They stayed quite composed while significant parts of their game weren't going right, but they kept it together, they kept their unity, and they managed to make it happen. And I think that's a big moment for them. Number 20. Excuse me, that's been building. Number 20. This result is huge, right? But don't misread it. New Zealand ended South Africa's 12-test winning streak. They won at Ellis Park. They took that opening test with a 33-16 score. It is a great result. It's a huge All Blacks result. But South Africa will look at the scrum dominance, the territorial pressure, all those wasted 22 entries. And they'll know this wasn't a match where they couldn't simply were out-competed. This was a match where they didn't take the chances, where maybe the pressure got to them. So the lasting story of this whole test match is really quite simple, I think. South Africa created enough pressure to win. New Zealand handled that pressure better than them, and they were ruthless when their chances came. That's why it finished 5-1, and that's why New Zealand won this first test. I don't know who's going to win the second test. I do know it's going to be bloody amazing. And I can't wait to see it, right? I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please comment, please like, do all the good stuff. And let me know what you want to hear. Like as in, I'm thinking that I'll probably do another one of these looking ahead at what we've learned from this game that we take into the second match. Which we've done a little bit of today, but I want to let it percolate a little bit. I think there'll be insights that come out over the next day or two from my brain, but probably also actually just listening to other people and hearing, probably not my brain, right? It's going to be other people where I go, oh, that's a great point. So anyway, that's us. I'm going to call it there. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.